This is a 2012 Porsche Cayenne, and specifically, it is my 2012 Porsche Cayenne, and it was the cheapest one in the country that was certified pre-owned when I bought it about 2.5 years ago. As part of being a certified pre-owned vehicle, it means it had an unlimited mile, 2-year bumper-to-bumper warranty. So truth be told, before I bought this, I really didn't know anything about Porsches. I knew they were expensive, but I never thought I would be able to afford one, in large part because I was worried about the maintenance costs. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to give a breakdown of everything that's broken on this in the last 2.5 years and roughly 20,000 miles since I've owned it. We'll go over what it cost me with the warranty to replace, what it would cost if you did it yourself, or if you went to an independent mechanic or the dealer and paid out of pocket. That way you have a good idea of what this would actually cost to own depending on how you maintain your vehicles. So with that, let's get to it. All right, so I bought the car about 2.5 years ago. Like I said, it was a 2012 model year. It had about 62,000 miles on it, and I paid just over 20,000 US dollars for it. And the maintenance that I've had in the last 20,000 miles seems to be pretty typical for what other people within the forums and stuff have experienced. So this is not going to be like the end-all be-all of information, but this seems to be pretty representative. So with that, let's start going through this. And the first thing I want to note is, even though I was told it's a bumper-to-bumper warranty for the certified pre-owned, it doesn't cover things that are just like routine consumables. So like your brakes, your tires, your oil changes, things like that are not covered because those are wearable items anyhow. So first of all, oil changes and oil filters, they are just under $65 on average if you do them yourself between the oil and the filter, and that is going with a full synthetic. On paper, they say the service interval is every 10,000 miles, so I should have only had to do twice, but I can feel the car starts a little bit harder every 5,000 miles or so, and it starts running, I would just say, a little bit rougher, especially in the really cold New England weather that we get here. So typically I do not go past the 4,000 to 5,000 mile mark. So that is 4 oil changes for me. So again, if you round it up to $65 per, you're looking at about $260 total. Now, if you went to a local shop, that's an independent shop, they usually charge about $120 for an oil change near me for this car. And if you went to a dealer, my local dealers charge about $230. Now, $230 for me seems a little excessive for an oil change. They say, oh, we look other things over too, but so does the independent shop. So, you know, if it's your money, spend it how you want. But for me, that doesn't really make sense, right? One thing I want to note though is that if you're doing the oil changes yourself, or if you want to do any of this work on your own, you need a Porsche specific scan tool. This resets the oil interval light. It resets the service required light. You cannot do it through the menus on the car. This car is from the era where Porsche, among all the other manufacturers, were trying to make it so that you didn't have the ability to work on your own car, so that you had to bring it into them or go through one of their certified mechanics. But the point being, you have to buy one of these scan tools. The cheapest one I could find is like a knockoff unit on eBay that was $145.95. So if you look at all the things that you're going to need to do to the car long term, especially if you own it for more than 3 to 5 years, that tool is going to pay for itself very quickly, but just know that you will have to buy that upfront if you want to work on this car on your own. One of the other things that you need to work on these cars is the Torx bits. So I got 2 sets of Torx bits. That was $31.48, and that was for both the screwdriver bit attachments for the hand tools as well as the socket attachments, so you could actually like unratchet some of them or use it on power tools. If you want to do pretty much anything on this car, you need to have those Torx bits. I did not have them because I don't know pretty much any other vehicles that consistently use them, especially not to this level. So factor that in with your cost if you're planning on doing this on your own. So the next thing is the wiper blades. The first winter storm I had, they got absolutely shredded by a nice icy mix, and of course the ones that Porsche uses, they have a weird connector to clip in, so you have to get the wiper blades that are made of unobtainium. So those were $57.98 for the front pair. An independent shop would have charged me $90 to get those installed, and the dealership was $130. All right, next in line is the first winter I had to buy snow tires for this car. That is not necessarily specific to this car. I pretty much do that for every time I get a new vehicle because here in New Hampshire, it snows, and you know, you gotta be able to get around. I have the most base model wheels known to man on this one, so they are 18-inch wheels, and that was $841.96 through a local shop. That included the installation. Other places around me for independent shops were charging closer to $1,000 to $1,100, and the dealer wanted about $1,348 for a set of snow tires, but that was like their special ones allegedly. Even so, I did a lot of research on different tires to get ones that I thought were the absolute best for the money, and I think I got ones that performed better for $500 less. So like always, just do your research before you buy anything. Either way, way when you're getting something like tires. Now, because this car is relatively heavy, it's like 5,500 pounds, you go through a lot of these consumables a little bit more often than you might on something like a RAV4 or a Toyota Camry or anything that, weighs less than 5,500 pounds. For point of reference, my Mustang was a heavy sports car. It was 3,600 pounds. My Viper was 3,400 pounds. And the Corvette Z06s that compete with it are like 3,200 pounds. So those are considered lighter cars with a similar size engine. So the fact that this one is a full 2,000 pounds more should give you some perspective of just how heavy this is. So as a result of that, you're pressing down on your tires harder. It's working your brakes and stuff harder because you have more energy to stop. So I had to replace the tires as well. So if you notice in the intro today, I have a new set of 19-inch tires that were the upgraded set from when this car came out. So I actually got a really good deal on those. I'm not going to include the price of the wheels themselves. I'm going to do a different video on that. But the tires on the 19-inch set was $1,107.12 plus another $80 to get them mounted and balanced, and then I put them back on the car. So that was a total DIY price of $1,187.12. The independent shop wanted $1,400 for the 19-inch tires. The dealership wanted $1,500. Next on the list here is one of the first things that broke when I got the car. This failed about a month after I got it, and that was a TPMS sensor for the tire pressure. That was covered under warranty. If you get the cheapest sensor possible and you try to swap it out yourself, it's about $90. If an independent shop does this, they gotta unmount the wheel, remount it, and then it's the price of parts. It's about $270 for them, and Porsche quoted me about $419 to replace the one sensor with an OEM sensor. And then a couple months back, about 6 months ago, on one of the last months of my warranty, I had a second sensor die. Again, $0 to me, $90 DIY, $270 for the independent shop. Porsche's dealership price went up to $528 to replace the one wheel sensor. Over the 2.5 years, I also got an alignment, so obviously the DIY price, I would never recommend doing that. I'm going to keep that as the same price as the independent shop at $105. And then the dealership wanted $330 for a four-wheel alignment. The next one, and this is a big one, is the transfer case. That is a known problem on these cars, and you can tell if it's going because especially on cold starts or in cold weather, when you first start shifting into gear, it gets a little clunky. When you first go to take off from a stop, it might clunk a little bit before it starts going along. Mine was exhibiting some of those symptoms. It wasn't too bad, but just to be safe, I took it into the dealership. So mine was in need of replacement. If I were to do that myself, you cannot get the parts for cheaper than $2,100 used. If you go to an independent shop, it's about $4,500 for the install, and the dealership was going to charge $5,500 for the install, obviously with the parts and stuff as well. But that price can go up to $7,000 to replace the transfer case, which is probably the Achilles heel of this car. So when I was doing research into Porsches, I obviously, like I said, didn't really know anything about them going into them. What I found out was that, generally speaking, they are very reliable, but the one or two flaws that they will have from a mechanical standpoint will lead to catastrophic failures. So for example, on this one, the transfer case, $5,000 to $7,000 for a replacement. That's insane. Other ones where you had, I believe it was like the IMS bearing failures or something like that, that leads to engine failures. Now the good news, at least on this generation with the transfer case, is even though mine was replaced under a certified pre-owned warranty, I still got an independent letter completely separate from all this saying they were extending the warranty on all Cayennes from this generation because they knew this was such a big problem. Porsche knows a lot about branding and bringing customers back. They are very good about branding. They are very good about making their customers feel special, and they know something like that is going to put someone off pretty much for the rest of their life, and they'll never buy another one of these cars again. Porsche's build quality and their standards for quality are a lot higher as a result of that, and they genuinely do try to make stuff like that right. So even if you weren't covered by a certified pre-owned warranty, you would be covered by that extended warranty, and it should have been replaced or refunded because of that. So if that's the only reason you don't want to buy this car, it's probably been replaced on whatever one you're looking at, considering that they extended this for everyone. Next is a couple things that I've actually purchased but not installed, and that is just your regular tune-up service interval. So spark plugs, and then check your ignition coils. There's a special tool to remove the ignition coils. So between the two of those to do a spark plug change, it's $85.88 is what I paid in parts. If I went to an independent shop, it was going to be $300, and the Porsche dealership wanted to charge $1,200 $1,200 for that service interval. Now, supposedly for that $1,200, they potentially do a brake fluid flush, they check your cooling system to see if that needs to be flushed, and they check your pads and rotors. To me, none of that stuff is worth an additional $800 when I can flush all the coolant and the brake fluid on my own under another $200 or so. Which brings me to the next thing I have on this list, which is a brake fluid flush. Now, I bought the Motive Power Bleeder for this car, and that was $70.99 plus $22.95 for the drain bottles as well. That's pretty much the nicest setup that you can do to get it all done on your own, which means the first time you do this on your own, if you include all the tooling, is $110.93. But if you divide that out over how often you're going to use this, plus the cost of the fluid every time you do this, in a year or two, you're basically paying $40 per brake fluid flush when you average that cost of the equipment out over how many times you're going to end up doing this. So it's not as bad as it looks. An independent shop quoted me $160 to do the fluid flush, and just the fluid flush, nothing else, at the dealership was going to be $279. And finally, this is the only failure that I would consider to be like a semi-catastrophic one that could potentially leave you stranded. That was a coolant leak, which is never a good thing, because if your coolant isn't working, your engine overheats and can blow up. Again, Porsche likes their catastrophic failures. That seems to be their MO. What happens is they have a coolant bypass valve. It's not really that expensive of a part, but the connectors for the hoses on the ends are plastic. It is right behind the intake manifold. You actually have to pull the intake manifold off to get to it. So all that constant heat and then cooling off afterwards from the engine cycling, that eventually makes the plastic very brittle, so those plastic connectors crack off and the coolant leaks out. So I got that replaced under warranty. If you did it yourself, between the price of the parts and the price of the coolant to reflush the system, you're looking at $343.61. An independent shop quoted me $800. They said it was probably about a 4 or 5 hour job. The dealership was claiming it was 10 hours and they had to drop the transmission to get to this valve. They definitely did not drop the transmission. They pulled the intake manifold off, and they still were going to charge $1,200 to fix this one valve. Now, the reason that I consider this something that could leave you stranded is because everything on the Cayenne is controlled electronically. They don't show you an analog reading of all the gauge temperatures. They have a digital reading, which means Porsche can and does manipulate those temperatures. And here's what I mean by that, okay? The oil level in the car, there's no dipstick in the car. You can only check that electronically through the menu settings in the gauge cluster. That's the only way to check the oil level. And if the car detects either a coolant leak, a low coolant level, or the temperature is at all above the midpoint of where it's supposed to be in the gauge, which I believe is about 200 degrees Fahrenheit, rather than just showing you what the actual temperature is, instead it goes into full-on panic mode and tries to give you a heart attack by artificially and immediately taking the gauge and pinging it off of the high temperature warning light. It goes all the way directly into the red and starts bouncing off the high point and flashing red at you at over 250 degrees Fahrenheit, at which point the engine is toast. If it was really that high, your engine would be immediately fried. So I didn't know that this was just Porsche's way of warning you at first, so I panicked, freaked out, pulled over the car and turned it off. And I was like, what the actual hell? Did a quick check. Nothing was like clearly leaking that I could see. Nothing was overly hot. So my first thought was Googling, hey, why is it doing this? And then all the forums say Porsche does that to try to deter you from driving the car. They want you to pull over, park it, get it towed immediately to their shop for diagnosis, because again, they don't want you worrying about this. And to their credit, it works, because I stopped driving the car immediately, but also they are complete holes for doing this to you. So I was only like a mile or two from my house at that point, so I was like, okay, can I just limp this thing home so I don't have to flatbed it so I can figure out what's going on? And I was also only 5 or so miles from the dealership, and it was still under warranty at that time. So when I figured out that that's what they do as a warning, what I did is I started the car back up, it drove fine, and then after it did the pinging thing again, the temperature went back to where it actually was, and it was still well within the normal operating temperature range, and my coolant level within the cooling tank was a little bit low, but still at the minimum fill line. So that's more of a nuisance than anything, is Porsche deliberately trying to freak you out, and you think it's a catastrophic failure, but it isn't really, and you still have the ability to get home. But the fact that it gives you that complete heart attack kind of a dick move on Porsche's part. But anyway, back on topic here, getting off my soapbox, the total out-of-pocket cost that I have had for this car, considering that everything was covered under warranty, was $2,823.51 over the last 2.5 years. If you bought one of these without the warranty and you did everything yourself, you would expect to pay $5,376.19. If you went to an independent shop, it would have been $9,355, or if you went to the dealership, $13,124. Now these numbers seem like a lot, and in fact they are, because this was a $20,000 car. Even if you do the work yourself, it's 25% of the car's value, and the independent shop is almost 50% of what this car's value was, and I again bought one of the cheapest examples. But you have to keep in mind that the biggest expense for all of those is the transfer case, which is now covered by the extended warranty. So when you take out only the transfer case, again, my out-of-pocket cost is still at $23,51, but the DIY price goes down to $3,276.19. The independent shop goes down to $4,855, and the dealership price goes down to $7,624. So in all these cases, almost half the price is only the transfer case. But other than that, everything I've listed here is not necessarily a Porsche specific problem. It is just a car problem. Let me explain this, okay? Every car that you have with a TPMS sensor, I've never had one where the TPMS sensors didn't go bad. Every car needs oil changes, every car needs alignments, every car needs new tires, and I would argue that the prices of these are a little bit higher than the prices you would expect to pay on maybe a Corolla or a Camry or something, but you're not totally exempt from paying for these things. It's just maybe slightly less. So even the coolant leak, which is the only thing that I consider like a true Porsche engineering failure on this that wouldn't be covered. Again, $343.61 to do it yourself, under $1,000 to go to an independent shop. Other cars are still going to have weird failures like that. BMWs have coolant failures. My friend's got a Dodge Caravan and he had a coolant leak too. My Subaru Forester had a coolant leak. My WRX blew a radiator, and all of those, quite frankly, were more expensive to repair than this one is through a shop. So really, the only way to determine whether or not this is truly expensive is to compare it to something else from a similar era. So one of my very good friends has a 2011 Dodge Grand Caravan, a minivan. And at this point, it's got something like 200,000 miles on it. So my point is, it's from the same age relatively. It's got maybe a little bit more miles on it. You can get a little bit cheaper, but are you really saving money by getting that versus having a Porsche Cayenne? The friend who owns that Grand Caravan does not work on it themselves. They always take it to a local shop. So what I'm going to do is compare their prices at their local shop on average to what the Cayenne's price would be at the independent shop. But keep in mind that the price of the shop that I quoted is a Porsche specialist shop. It is just not a dealership. So with that in mind, if you take the $4,855 that you would spend over the 2.5 years, that works out to $176.55 per month that you would spend on the Cayenne on maintenance on average. And again, that's not doing the work yourself. By comparison, my friend with his Grand Caravan, we totaled up his maintenance costs over the same time period. The average monthly cost was $127 per month, which means to drive a Porsche Cayenne instead of a rusted Dodge Grand Caravan, it only cost you an extra $49.55 a month in maintenance, which works out to a little bit less than $600 a year. So here's the big takeaway, right? Is I was never really a Porsche person, and I always couldn't really justify the price versus what you got for it. And I also was concerned about the long-term maintenance cost being more than I could realistically afford. But what this shows is that while your routine maintenance is marginally more expensive, it's reliable enough that nothing else comes up, so that your overall total maintenance cost is really not that much worse than if you drive almost any other box, even if you don't want to do any of the work on your own. So for example, if you're a DIYer, the fact that this is like $3,300 over 2.5 years, that means you can pay in the ballpark of $1,250 a year in maintenance if you're doing it yourself. And that price includes 2 full sets of tires, because the tires alone are almost $2,000 of this total price. So here's the thing, right? A couple of the consumable things, like I said, they occur more often just because of how heavy the car is, but overall the car is so reliable reliable that that little bit of extra price that you're spending on those routine items is easily covered by the enhanced reliability everywhere else. Including the time it gave me a heart attack for the coolant, it's never left me stranded, it's never left me stuck on the side of the road or worrying about whether or not it's going to start. This car has been really good to me and is genuinely the only daily driver I've ever had that I've never had any problems with or ever had to worry about whether or not it was going to start that day. And that is probably one of the best feelings. I think that extra dollar sign alone is just worth the level of confidence that you can have in this vehicle, and then all the extra enjoyment that you get out of it on top of that, being so capable, being more comfortable and more relaxing to drive, I think personally for me easily justifies that difference in maintenance price. So if you're sitting in the same boat that I was 2.5 years ago and you're like looking at a Cayenne but a little bit nervous about it, I would say go for it. Don't be afraid to take the plunge. I always thought this car was going to be something that was completely unobtainable for me, and I finally had an opportunity that one kind of fell into my lap at the right time and at the right price point. And I'm very glad to say, and honestly quite surprised to say, that I don't regret it, which is not something I usually get to say about the vehicles I buy. But anyhow, that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you next time.